an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering One Piece, episodes 501, 502, and 503. The fire has been set, the Great Terminal in crisis. Where can freedom be found? A sad departure of a boy. And take good care of him. A letter from the brother. In these episodes, we have got the fire. We have got Sabo escaping, allegedly being killed. I find that unlikely. And overall, I'm really surprised at how fascinating this arc has been, even though I'm starting to really miss our main crew. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Florian for commissioning this episode. Florian, if you're out there, bud, thank you so much. Appreciate you. This arc, you guys, it's just... Oh, I'm sorry. I checked. It's Michael. I'm so glad I looked. I had a feeling. So Florian did the booking, but the cash was Michael's. So Michael, thank you for your service. But yeah, this arc has been really compelling, and I can't help but appreciate how much better the pacing seems here. Now, I know that the pacing tends to really be a major issue when we're looking at a lot of times what you guys have told me is that, the manga was moving ahead but not fast enough, so that the anime was beginning to catch up with it, and they had to add in some things so that we didn't overtake the manga. And totally understand that, but it is really difficult when that begins to happen, even if you know why it's happening. So I am just either that hasn't happened recently, or they have found a better way to cope with it than the ways they have before. Either way, I just really was pleasantly surprised seeing that we were doing more of the flashback. Because low-key, every time that I have been sort of signing in to watch the next episodes for Spoil Me, I have been sort of waiting to see when are we going to be returning to the present? And I'm not looking ahead, but I keep sort of beginning the next grouping of episodes thinking to myself, okay, so maybe I will have one more episode in the arc, because it's clear at the end of the grouping that the arc isn't over. But it's hard to know sometimes, because I'll think there's a lot more story to tell, and sometimes things will wrap up temporarily and we'll go to the present and we're not going to get the rest of the story later, or there's all kinds of things. So I've been sort of waiting for it, and I'm beginning to think that it's going to take a lot longer than I had thought. I don't know if there's a count on how many episodes are in this arc, but at this point, if we were doing 3 episodes and about 5 days, it feels like, so I feel like maybe 15, but it could be a little bit longer than that even. But yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised that being in this arc still, I am very compelled. I have so much that feels surprising in that, for example, Ace's overall attitude is still a little bit of a shock for me. I appreciated that in this episode eventually somebody tells him to just knock it off, because he's yelling at Luffy for crying. And Luffy is crying because he is so glad that Ace is okay. So Ace just being oh God, shut the fuck up. I really was Ace, can you just turn off your attitude for a minute, please? He is so angry all the time. And I get that that's part of his thing, but I just wasn't expecting Luffy to have such a hard time growing on him. I thought that eventually who Luffy is would have broken through. By now, I would have expected it to happen. And it seems like not. And I feel a bit bad about it because I know that they get to that point, but I had just hoped that Luffy would win him over more quickly. And the fact that he doesn't is probably realistic, but it's difficult to watch. Do you know what I'm saying? I remember, you guys, this was one of those like memories from when I was a kid that I had a moment of real, oh God, I was such a baby. But I remember they re-released the first Star Wars movie in theaters when I was a kid. And my mom, who had been just like blown away by Star Wars when it first came out, was so excited to take me. And there was a lot about Star Wars that was sort of in the zeitgeist to a general degree, not the way that zeitgeist works now with the internet, but I understood about C-3PO and R2-D2 and the way that they were sort of a matched set. And when I actually watched the movie and saw like that the two of them snipe at each other the whole time, I cannot tell you how like bummed I was, because I had this thing in my head that they were like best friends, and they are, but I was so little that I didn't understand the nuance of like the fact that they snipe at each other is a way that they show affection and they're bonded despite all of that. I was very put off by the like teasing sort of faux outrage thing that C-3PO has when he's like calling him like a rusted whatever. And so I feel like I'm having that here a little bit, where it's a similar, I had an expectation, you know, and it's not their fault that I had the expectation. Well, no, it's not. I had the expectation that things were going to have been exactly the same when they were kids as they are now. And that's just unrealistic. But it is difficult seeing how much Luffy cared about him and how quickly that happened for him, that it takes a lot longer for Ace to seem, it's not like Luffy doesn't mean anything to Ace, but it has sort of felt to me a little bit like if Sabo hadn't pushed Ace, he probably wouldn't have saved Luffy. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was being pushed by somebody who had a bit more of a conscience at the time. And I think that he grows to develop that, but it just is hard to see him not driven by the same morality that I associate with him in a lot of ways. So, all right, let's start episode 501. We have officially passed the 500 mark, kids. I am so excited about this. I'm sorry if you're watching this on video. I almost like put it off and then I didn't. I had an appointment at the dentist today and I got a crown and 4 fillings. So every now and then a bit of like filling scrap is breaking loose in my mouth and I have this like, you know, it's on my tongue. So apologies if you're listening and there's like a weird mouth sound. I'm so sorry, but I can't talk when it feels like I'm about to choke on tooth dust at any moment. I can't help it. I'm so sorry. So this fucking cracked me up a little bit, you guys, because the thrust of this episode is that Bluejam really thought, if I do this thing for the nobles, they'll make me one of them. And it's so trite seeming, this sort of plot beat. But it's trite seeming because this is how it works. People really believe that if they throw in with the upper classes, that the fact that they are part of the lower classes is just going to somehow go unremarked or unnoticed. And it is truly bananas to me that these people don't see the way they're being bamboozled, because to me it just seems so utterly transparent that the okie doke barely can even be called that, in my opinion. But evidently it's effective, because there are still people who are like buying this bullshit. And I just genuinely, guys, the way that this manages to work on people, it's disheartening. It makes me so bummed to realize how much people want to feel superior to those around them. And so they are more than willing to buy into something that in truth does not make any sense, because they are grasping for anything that, in their opinion, will elevate them above the average person. And just knowing that, it's hard. It's hard to live in a world where you realize, like, that's what people often are looking for, is a way to feel like they are separate and apart from most folks, because they need to feel more important for some empty hole inside them. I just, and I'm not trying to pretend that I'm like different from that exactly. I'm not. In certain ways, I have as much of a tendency to feel superior to people as anybody. But from the ways that I feel superior often are very petty, silly things like they don't season their food, I'm a better cook than them. That kind of thing, like individual shit. Not like as a group, these people are, you know what I'm saying? And it's, I know that's more of a recent development for me, that there have been times in the past where I have felt above certain people and like as groups, and didn't see the problem with that. But that's part of what's so frustrating, is that I know I used to be that way, and that I have grown and see more clearly now. And looking around at people who are even older than me, who haven't gotten the message, who don't understand that it's like they're being played. I think that's the thing I have a really, really hard time with, is just how clear it seems to me at my young age of, 39. And there are fucking elders who are still playing this silly game that they are never going to win, because the way it's designed is to keep you from winning. Because if you could win, their status wouldn't mean anything anymore, And that's what I think a lot of people just don't really understand, is like this American dream thing, where we act as if you can be anything you want as long as you work hard enough. There are so many other factors at play other than just hard work, but we really want it to simply be hard work, because that makes us feel in control. We don't like admitting we're at the whims of destiny and circumstance. And also, we don't like to admit that getting to reach a certain place in society, that place in society couldn't exist if everybody could achieve it. But the way we rationalize it is, but not everybody works hard enough to achieve it. It's there if you're willing to, we really find all of these like ways to camouflage our actual intent, which is simply to feel like we have power over another group. And this thing with Bluejam is so embarrassing, because it's absolutely clear to us, the viewer, that he isn't going to get what he thinks he's going to get. It's immediately obvious. And he is so confident that he has managed to broker this killer deal that it's just going to be him sauntering up to this fucking gate and saying, "Let me in," and that's all it's going to take. The fact that he really believes this, I don't know how he has survived this long. Like, truly, that's what it comes down to at this point, is just, sir, how are you still alive? If you swallow this bait the way that you did, what you still doing here? How, though? So, this answers my question in the previous episodes of whether or not he knew what he was doing, because I was like, maybe he's just been paid to distribute these boxes and he hasn't checked inside them. And it seemed sort of unlikely that he wouldn't bust open some boxes from nobles that are allegedly valuable and find out what was inside them. But I just couldn't figure out what would possess him to do this, unless it was like he was getting a bunch of money and then was just going to sail off. And the way that it sort of shakes out, and this was like a real surprise, and I found it pretty interesting actually, was that when it turns out that he has been used and played for a fool, he kind of snaps a little bit, like, and begins to behave as if he has sort of lost his mind. And there's a real unhinged quality about him that Ace can see. But it's unfortunate. Ace winds up getting played pretty quickly afterward, because he thinks, okay, I'll just give him the treasure he's asking for and then he'll let us go. And I just really wanted to slap and shake him, because I couldn't help but feel that's there's nothing about the situation that should lead you to believe that this man is going to help you. He doesn't know how to get out of this himself. He's kind of lost his head because of a feeling of like hopelessness and imminent death. So if he's feeling that way, why do you believe that he can help you out of this situation? He would be doing that for himself in the first place. But we'll get there in a second. So yeah, the episode begins 500. Or no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. 500 begins with him explaining to the boys about what it was that they were actually doing, setting their explosives all over the place. And he's like, well, now that you know about the grand plan, you're stuck here. We can't risk letting you go. But there is something that I've been meaning to ask you boys. So tell me, is it true that you brats are hiding treasure around here somewhere? And I don't know how that got out, but it bummed me out so much, because they just... Look, I'm somebody who has lived in an impoverished state much of my life, and saving and working as hard as they did to put the money together that they have, and then having some fucking creep like this swoop in and take it. And not even just that he's a creep, but he's also a fucking dodo bird. I mean, that is unconscionable. I hated watching this happen. So when he asks them this, I was just like, God damn it, who fucking told? And I don't know if it's just that somebody spotted them, or they've just noticed the kids are busting in here and taking shit, but we don't see them out there spending the money, so they must be putting it somewhere, I don't know how this information got out, but it doesn't really matter at this point. We jump over briefly to Sabo getting tossed down into the basement by his father, who basically says, I've put up with enough of your shit. All you do is make me look like a fool, and I don't want to fucking deal with you anymore. So down you go. And Sabo's whole, the way that things go for him for a little while, where he's just basically being seen by a tutor and stuff, I was really I liked the way that it sort of underscores the cruelty of these people, that even though they all know that this fire is going to happen, it's not really a special event, It's not considered any sort of an emergency, or I hesitate to use the word holiday. That is kind of what I'm leaning toward, but that's not really. But the fact that they're just leading their lives the way that they always do. Their kids are just expected to do school and homework the way that they always have. It's really creepy. It really adds a sort of level to everything that's just makes it feel all the more. It's like, how do you excuse any of this? Not that you could, but it makes it all feel a lot grosser. So there's the fire begins to be lit, and the way it's lit, all the explosives that are like placed around are basically being shot at by Bluejam's people. And this causes a weird, I think that I was like forgetting that there's a couple of different sort of parts of town, because we have first the bandits with the Don all like being like, is that the town? And then realizing like, no, this blaze is closer. I think it's Great Terminal. It's on fire. But then you jump to like some townsfolk, and they're all like, well, wait, what's going on? Great Terminal has never caught fire before. And for a moment, I was sort of like, why are you guys surprised? You just got asked about this and you all knew. And then I remembered that the town is divided into different classes. And so, yeah, no, they did not know. And I just felt like there was something sadder about how even if you are in town, if you're not in the right town, nobody cares. It's still like you're going to be not necessarily part of the genocide that they're kind of, that's not the right word, because genocide is like a particular, I mean, they are a particular group because of where they live. Does that count? I don't know whether I can call it that or not. I don't, but anyway, they're not part of it because the folks that are inside the walls at least are defended from the fire. But I don't want to say that they're safe from this, because for sure, if you are like at a lower rung on the social ladder, you are disposable ultimately. You know, it's the sort of thing that's like, we want to believe that you can reach a point where you won't be on the chopping block, but like that's only going to happen if you reach a really high place. And I think we dramatically underestimate what that place is where we would finally be safe. And we really think it's lower than it is. So this, you know, like the fire spreading and everything is all punctuated by Bluejam, like laughing to himself and really thinking that he's got one over on everybody else. And meanwhile, the people who live in Great Terminal who are not scumbag pirates are just like fleeing for their lives. And it's really upsetting. Like there's a couple different points where they're we see like little neighborhoods where there are sort of shacks built. So it just really did keep sort of driving home for me the connection of all of this with the homeless community. This was just really uncomfortable. And in a way that's like, I'm not criticizing it for that. That's the point. But I was surprised how much this, despite being over the top with the evil, laughing villains and the extreme language that they're using to indicate their contempt for people, I know that all of that is a shade more extreme, but I have just really grown to understand how much less exaggerated that is than I think it is. Because the things that you wind up finding out people in power have said about those that they are mistreating, oppressing, exploiting, it's almost beyond belief what comes out of people's mouths sometimes. So as much as I want to be like, this was very over the top, it wasn't that over the top to me. And it kept sort of catching me off guard how upsetting I found that my instinct was to sort of like roll my eyes at a few points and then stop and be like, God, but that's not that far off, you know? So eventually all of the like blame for this fire gets circulated around town as being, Bluejam, of course. And people are guessing like, oh my God, he was trying to keep the world government away so that he could keep on terrorizing us. And what a perfect, because the thing is, in reality, setting up somebody like Bluejam to take the fall, he technically did do what they're saying about setting the fire. It wasn't his idea, but he did do it. So even though it feels unfair to blame him in some ways, it's really not. He was willing to kill all of these people in order to like achieve status himself, which makes him pretty much just like all of the nobles. But what I feel like in life would probably be more likely is that Bluejam would have not been involved at all. That they would lay the blame at his feet, especially if he happened to be something like a civil rights leader. Then they would probably be even more inclined to frame him for it, because that's just how we get down in this country. So the main thrust here, other than what's going on with Bluejam and him getting played and all of this, is that Sabo is having a complete crisis about who he is, and Luffy and Ace are tied up in the midst of the fire. And guys, Dragon is here, and I was so excited. I didn't think that we were going to see him this quickly. And then later on, it's not just Dragon, but also it turns out that Eva is here. And I did not see that shit coming. I know that Eva had straight up said, I worked with your father. Bitch, I'm so sorry, but I totally forgot about it. I wasn't thinking about it. And even if he did, that would not lead me to necessarily expect to see him in a flashback when Dragon turns up. So I just loved this. I was so delighted, you guys. It was really fun to have the two of them turn up in such a different context. And Dragon, I had thought that it was going to turn out to be him that sort of saves his and Luffy's ass later on. But, yeah, this is when Bluejam finds out that his ship is on fire and that there's no way for him to escape. And all of his own pirates are just like, fuck. And then Dragon comes across Sabo in the street because he is like, I am so disgusted that I'm part of this. I hate being a noble, and I can't stay here. I can't live here because I will never know peace. Like, there's no way. And the moment where later on, let's see, Bluejam is like, let's see, you might as well tell me where your treasure is. I'm just trying to stop another tragedy. I already saw my ship reduced to charcoal. It'd be a shame if that happened to your treasure, too. And we see his eyes get, like, kind of weird. And he says, all your hard work and for nothing. And then Ace just says, all right, you win. Now, I'm going to really try and, like, hedge what I'm saying here, because I want to acknowledge that when it's the dub, it's not necessarily a completely accurate translation of the original dialogue. But I just wanted to point out that all he's saying is like, tell me where your treasure is or else it might get destroyed and burned up. Which, one, wouldn't happen to gold. It would just melt together and become a big giant gold blob, which would be fine, more than likely. But also, there's no actual offer in that statement. All he's saying is like, I'll find it and I'll hold on to it and keep it safe for you, which is laughable. But he never says, tell me and I'll save your lives. Tell me and I'll get you out of here. Tell me and I'll, there's no counter offer Ace just says, okay, you win, and tells him where it is. And I really had hoped that he had given him incorrect information. Now, it seems like he didn't, but I don't mean that what happens at the end, because Ace eventually tells Luffy our treasure is gone. That's not what I'm referring to when I say it seems like he did give them correct information, because I'm actually sort of hoping that that treasure was Sabo, that he took it. Although I would have to take exception to someone like Sabo stealing from these poor fucks here. But what I mean is that the outrage later on from Ace at the fact that they're being double-crossed points to me to somebody who felt they held up their end of the deal the way they said, and they couldn't believe that they were going to be punked like this. So if he feels like he held up his end of the deal, then he must have given them the correct info. And I just don't know what he thought he was getting in return, or why he felt giving up this information was the right thing to do. It just feels like there is something lost in translation, very literally, in that scene. And it doesn't work in the dub, because it feels in the moment like he's just telling this guy, which was part of why I thought, sure, he's going to give him like a fake map. That's why it seemed like he capitulated so easily, because he isn't really. It's not that simple, but it appears it is that simple. And Luffy is just really like disgusted with him and saying like, what would Sabo think about this whole thing? Finally, Bluejam is like, all right, so I don't think I trust you kids. I'm not above stealing from children or murdering them. These nobles will regret the day that they crossed Bluejam. And then he has this whole thing about how Sabo wasn't really your friend, that he was like laughing at you behind your back and enjoying how foolish you were. And all of it is just really like understandable, actually, in a way that he would assume that. But we know Sabo and understand that that's not what's happening. So this is when one of the guys lifts a sword above Luffy, and he says, "So long, kid," and he's about to drive the sword down, and Ace says, "Get the hell away from Luffy." And when he does, it's like he has activated Haki here by accident, and all these dudes go down, except Bluejam. And I don't know why he is, because we haven't seen, as far as I recall, any particular devil fruit power from Bluejam, or anything to indicate that he would be immune to this. Now, what I'm going to guess, and this is just complete headcanon, but it feels like the sort of thing that gels with the way things tend to work in this world. I think what could be going on here is that Ace is so new to doing this, like it wasn't a conscious choice, that he can affect people who are like a certain amount of weakness and below. And that Bluejam just happens to be a pirate with a higher tolerance somehow. And so this like young kid saying this doesn't really make any effect on him, but it does to his like inferiors. And that's just, like I said, I'm making this up, but it feels like it works with the overall information that I have about it. It's very little about how Haki works, because there definitely seems to be a kind of hierarchy within it. So the fact that they all go down like this, I'm going to be honest, you guys, it wasn't until a second viewing, well, not even, because I began to realize very obviously as this episode progressed, but the first time I watched this scene, I thought, having just seen Dragon in another scene, that he had turned up to save Ace and Luffy here. That he talked to Sabo, he hears what's going on with the people being burned alive. He takes off for Gray Terminal, and he happens to like run across these two in the midst of dire straits just by accident, and saves them from Bluejam. And so I wasn't grasping the fact that what Ace says, which is stay away from Luffy, that his expression and the way the light changes happens purely to coincide with his statement, and that's clearly what he was doing. So that's pretty amazing. Like, you know, Luffy is only just learning how to use hockey now as a 17-year-old, I guess he's supposed to be. And Ace here is like 10 or 11. He is very young to have been harnessing this. And I feel like there's got to be a lot of impressive shit that Ace got up to off screen that I have yet to see. And I wonder how much of that we're going to get to see. We can't just like sidetrack to flashbacks of all that constantly. But what I'm imagining is that maybe for like several arcs, we run into people who knew Ace, and we get to hear some stories about Ace through them and the experiences that they had with this guy. But yeah, the fact that he was able to pull this off as such a little child is really, really remarkable. And for his part, Bluejam just does not know what to do with Ace. Like, he comes up to him and holds his gun up and is just like, I'm going to fuck you up, kid. But it's clear that he is just shaken by the fact that this little kid managed to take him down, or take all of his men down, not him. So the episode ends with the shot of a gun like echoing, and sort of makes you think that he shot Ace, which does not make any sense because we know that Ace is alive. And then when we start the next episode, it's Dadan here with all of her bandits, and they are taking up Luffy and Ace and trying to flee. And this is so great, you guys. It's such a perfect combination, and I loved it so much. Because when she appears with all of her people behind her, it's a real fist pump moment. You're really doing like, oh shit, Dadan showed the fuck up for these two, finally. Like, I knew she cared about him, and even though she was a pain in the ass and called them brats all the time, she was fucking here when the chips were down. And then, of course, she challenges Bluejam to like a one-on-one fight. And it's very intimidating when she says it all. And then when he's like, all right, bring it on, she says, all right. And then immediately run and flees. I was cracking up. I did not see that coming. I was so unprepared because she really seemed so serious about like facing down with him. And honestly, there was a part of me that was a little disappointed because I wanted to get to see her fight. I wanted to see what it really looked like for Dadan to like pull the stops out after her having been such a fucking goon for all of these episodes. Maybe that she got to show off a little bit. So I was a bit bummed that it just turned into like, let's run away. But at the same time, it was just such a good joke, and it really does seem to fall in line with the characterization that we have seen of her so far. You know, she's rough and tumble and doesn't seem to have much of a spine on her. And that's part of the reason that they were able to not get one over, but just basically run roughshod over her as kids and do what they wanted, is because she just doesn't really like want to put much effort in. So I just sort of went back and forth on this, but I decided that I really liked it and thought it was genuinely funny. And finally, there's this moment, and this is Dragon. because Ace refuses to leave when all of them flee. He's going to stay and fight. We go over to some of the other like gray terminal guys looking around, trying to find a way out, sweating and crying and just like, maybe I should just lay down and die. And then all of a sudden there's this like vortex of wind and the fire parts, like not just the fire, but the material that's on fire. There's like a groove dug into it, like parting of the Red Sea. And the fire itself dies away in this one particular trench. And all these people are like, oh my God, there's a path. Did somebody do that on purpose? And one of them just yells, who cares? Now we can get out of this hellhole. Righto. Now, the animation here was really interesting because you see the trench and you hear their voices and then they sort of like run into view in the trench, right? But they were so much smaller than I was expecting when they came through. The size of this trench is humongous. And I was just really... I had in my mind's eye a sort of like size of this. And when I realized just how huge this was, I was even more impressed. So then here's Eva showing up. I've seen some shit, but this takes the cake. It's absolutely reprehensible. Anywho, this locale is rather out of the way. How did you hear the news? Were you keeping an eye on this country? Or perhaps is there something here of interest to you? And Dragon says, what happened here will happen in the rest of the world soon enough. Human beings can't be thrown away. A world that allows that must change. No matter how long it takes, I will stomp out this misery and injustice. And I really thought it was interesting. Like, I think it's meant to be not necessarily that Iva knows that Dragon has a kid, or because it feels like Eva's questions are so pointed that he must be aware, right? You know, the way that he asks, like, well, is there some other reason that you noticed this place? And I have to assume that Dragon, like, his son being here was a factor. But then I can sort of step back and be like, well, why do I think that he would even know where Luffy is? Why he may just actually have been aware that there was something that was going to go down here, and that was why he was drawn here, and it was circumstantial. I can't tell. I know that he stepped in and saved Luffy at Lowtown when he was about to be executed. So I'm sort of like assuming that was on purpose for Luffy because he knows Luffy is his son. He knows he has a son. But I don't know if he's known the whole time. If you know what I'm saying? Like, is he aware at this point and this is just a sort of accidental, they brush up against one another in a Love Actually-esque kind of way where it's just a funny coincidence, but they don't really have anything that connects them yet? Or is it actually because he's been tracking Luffy down or already knew where he was and heard about this and wanted to save his kid? I don't know. But yeah, as he's thinking about this, he's just like, remembering Sabo and saying the future of this place, the children of this place have to have a future that they can actually believe in. And then he goes to the front of the ship and he yells down to the men there, it's freedom. If it's freedom you want, so long as you have the will to fight for it, you are welcome aboard this ship. And, we get to see this really cool animation of like the island on fire with the sort of dip in the center where the trench is and then the silhouette of the ship against it. And I just really thought that looked cool. So then we go to the fucking palace, at Hightown, and we kind of cycle through a few different households. And people like sound asleep, not worried about this whole horrible thing happening at all. And we go to Sabo's house, and his mother is asking where he is. Have they found him yet? And he does like to give us a hard time. And her husband just says that he does. It's not, I mean, it is about you guys, but like, it's also so not about you guys. So the people in the town are watching this fire and getting a little bit like worried as it's getting bigger and bigger. Well, surely they'll let us into Hightown to get away from this if it keeps going like this. And one of the guys is looking back and he's like, I wouldn't count on it, because those gates are very, very tight. There's no getting through that if they don't want to let us through. And I don't think they do. So then we go to the bandits who have taken Luffy out of the equation, but Dadan and Ace are still in the fire, and they're starting to worry that the two of them didn't even make it. And then we have them actually showing up the next time, or the next morning, I think. This shot of Ace carrying Dadan is so great, you guys. What a beautiful, weird silhouette that has. Let's see. Word is they were sent in to clean up everything after the fire died down. And by clean up, I mean take care of any remaining evidence. I'm sure that extends to killing off the survivors, too. You'd be no exception. So, yeah, this dude is just telling Luffy, like, even if they did survive the fight, I don't know how they survive, like, the soldiers that are going to be circling through and taking everybody down. And Luffy is just yelling, I can't leave him out there. We have to let Sabo know that we didn't die. And nobody knows what to do with this, like, crying Luffy. And this is something that gets brought up a couple times, like, both in Sabo's letter, and Ace says it a lot. He just gets frustrated with the fact that Luffy cries at all. And personally, I am sort of a fan of the crying. Like, Luffy cries so infrequently in the present that there's something reassuring about knowing that these emotions are in him. He's not, you know what I mean? Like, Ace's death is the first time that I can think of where we've seen that kind of raw sadness from him. We've seen anger as he's like getting in a fight and stuff, but I don't feel like I remember him just being devastated like that. But yeah, so this is, when people we get the gossip in the town about how, Bluejam didn't fare too well. And one of them says, let's hope the bastard was on his ship when it burned. And then we go to Sabo and he's waking up and he's like literally in an alley somewhere with the bandages on his head. And poor Sabo, he's just trying. He wants to like make his way so bad. But out here, the way that this whole place is structured, it's not meant to let him get away with it all. So all of these dudes are like scouring the streets for him. And eventually a couple soldiers come upon him and are just like, why don't we give up this hide and seek thing and you just go home? And the actual soldiers, these helmets that they've got on are so weird. It almost looks like the Zodiac Killer a little bit. And I'm not really sure if it's supposed to be that they're like particularly outlandish or if they're based on something. They look like the gas masks from World War I sort of look, you know. But anyway, every time they turn up, they just look so creepy. So Sabo gets brought back to his father, and you know, we have the little interim here where he is basically his father says, I don't want to be cruel, but I am certainly capable of it. And anything else I so desire, you could disappear just like your friends. Are we clear? And just the fact that this man is like, do what I say, or I will literally kill you. It's like awful, but at the same time, it's hilarious to me that he thinks that sort of threat is not going to make Sabo flee immediately. Of course, he's going to, like, that's more motivation than anything to get the fuck up out of there. So yeah, because like the whole thing had been that Sabo was trying to get down there to warn them, and it's the next day. It's too late now, you know. Like, it's what point is there in struggling when if they were going to die in the fire, it's already happened. And his father is just like, you'll be able to live the life we've planned out. Won't that be nice? And I love when he says, won't that be nice? And then he follows it up with, and I'm sure it will be nice for you as well. When he said, won't that be nice? He didn't even mean for Sabo. He just adds that on like, oh yeah, like probably for you too, I guess. That feels really correct to me. This is when Stelly comes in. The fucking weirdo face. Dependable as always, Stelly. We've got that big ceremony coming up, you know. Let's buy you some new clothes. You'll look so handsome for the celestial dragon. And Stelly looks at Sabo and is like, heh. And as much as, of course, Sabo wants love, like, it feels like shit to be treated like this by your parents. There's also a part of me that's like, Stelly, you're over here smirking about the fact that you are liked and he isn't, when being liked by these people is actually a real mark of shittiness on your part. That's not something that you should really aspire to in a real way, beyond just the simple fact of them being his parents and the child wanting to be loved by his parents. But anyway, yeah, so eventually Sabo is able to fucking escape after all. And it's very fun and satisfying. I love the way that it's animated where while Sabo is still in his father's clutches and studying the way he's meant to, he is the only thing that's in color, and like the room and the people around him are all in this black and white. And it just really gives the impression of him being in a prison somehow. And he's thinking about Luffy and Ace, and he's just like, you know what? They're pretty, like, savvy dudes. I would be willing to bet that they're okay. I wish so much that I could see you guys again. But if you are still alive, and I leave here and they manage to follow me, I'll lead them right to you. And I can't do that. I'm not going to put you guys at risk, because the best thing you've got going for you right now is that they believe that you are likely dead. So that's why he doesn't include this, like include going to say goodbye to them or anything. So yeah, we see the kids, like guards, changing shifts, and one of the men who's like been asleep when he's supposed to have been watching Sabo says that he's never seen a celestial dragon. And the other guy says, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. And then says, I mean, just think, the harbor's going to be a mess. The whole town's going to be here. That's a lot of people to keep track of. And what I had thought he was saying was like, that isn't really a bad thing, because if you see a celestial dragon, that's just bad fucking news for you. That's what I thought he was, you know, basically, if you see one, that means that you've really fucked up somehow. But apparently he's just talking about, like, logistics. So Sabo winds up, like, knocking these dudes out, we find out later. That's, like, he fought them, which is just amazing. But I'm going to sort of jump ahead here, because him showing up, like jumping on the deck of a ship, I was very much like, wait, how did all of this happen? And there's a ship that's leaving port when everybody's here to welcome the celestial dragon. And the people who are like at the docks, I guess, they're like, you're blocking their path in, which is really funny because he's like, absolutely not. But it's more that none of us are supposed to be like leaving when somebody of such importance is arriving here. We delay our departures so as to be willing to like give them our respects. You know, we are going to take the time to acknowledge them and their important asses before we continue on our own business, because that's just what's due them. And then one of the dudes with the little opera glasses spots all the way out that there's a little boy on the boat. He's the only one steering. And Sabo's mom and dad are immediately like, oh shit, wait a minute. But we see, because he's like, I gave the guards strict orders, and we see that one guard just absolutely passed out on the ground. And Sabo is so happy standing on this deck. Nice weather today, perfect for setting sail. And his flag is just an S with a Jolly Roger like crossed bones on it. I think that if I were going to guess what his Jolly Roger was going to look like, I would have thought it would be that top hat with the goggles, that, you know, that steampunk hat. But apparently not. And I don't know if there's another Jolly Roger that has the top hat, and his might have been too similar. But the just plain S, I mean, it's just, it feels too simple. Do you know what I'm saying? But anyway, so there's a bunch of like back and forth on the transponder snails about this ship and how he's heading right for them. I can't help but laugh sometimes at how different the perspective is at different shots on this show, because from the audience looking out at Sabo's ship, he looks like he's half a mile away. But when you're on Sabo's ship looking back at the people, it looks like they're 100 yards away, if that, you know? And he's telling them, I'm not going back. I have to follow my dream. Nobody's going to change me. And the whole like vibe of this was, for me, I wasn't considering what was going to happen to him too closely. I thought that he was going to somehow manage to get out of this and that he'd be okay. And I still ultimately do think that he's probably fine. But what happens is that he winds up alongside a Navy ship. And him having the Jolly Roger is enough for this fucking celestial dragon who sucks balls. He's just like, I don't care how old the kid is. He is a pirate. He's filth. His age is irrelevant. So we're going to take him the fuck out. And they zero in on Sabo's ship and just fire on him with what looks like basically a bazooka. And the ship is listing really badly. And I'm going to jump ahead into the next episode here. Because the way that this like repeats the first, oh God, you guys, here it is. Take good care of him. A letter from the brother. That's the name of the third episode. I was like, I can't remember what one's called. This is the one where Ace turns up at the beginning again, but then we see the ship going down, Sabo's Jolly Roger getting lit up. His hat goes like flying out into the air, and everybody who is watching is definitely assuming that this kid is dead, that the ship is sinking. I don't know how he would have escaped this. I assume that he can swim, but I don't think that, you know, they would welcome him on the Navy ship if he were to be like trying to climb up out of the water onto there. Or I don't know what kind of equipment there is. You know what I'm saying? Like it really looks like he got fired on so directly that I just don't believe that he would die, but I don't know how else this could possibly go. There's not a good alternative for me. So everybody else pretty much comes to that same conclusion. And this leads to what happens in the final episode when Ace and Dedan have finally managed to take down Bluebeard between the two of them. And they get home. In the morning, they get a letter from Sabo after finding out what happened to his ship. So the letter, they believe, is like arriving posthumously. And Ace goes off and reads it by himself and gets really emotional after yelling at Luffy over and over again about how much of a crybaby he is. And just the feeling of like unfairness that my friend had to go through this and he was taken away from me the way that he was. All of it just is really emotional. And I am hoping that somewhere in the midst of what's coming, Luffy will stumble across Sabo. And even though Ace is gone, he will have this other friend that means something to him. But I don't know. If Sabo were alive, I feel like Luffy might have been contacted by him already, because Luffy's become quite notorious. But maybe Sabo just wants to keep a low profile. I don't know. But yeah, so the whole, I've got to wrap this up, but Ace and the fact that he won't leave Bluejam until he fights him. There's a bit of a flashback to Dedan talking to Garp about the fact that, like father, like son, essentially, Goldie Roger never walked away from a fight. And she's like, fleeing is a valid tactic. And he's like, not for him. Which, it's sort of funny because, like, that is the kind of thing that sounds really badass, but in practice actually is extremely foolish. So I know what we're trying to do, but also this show can underscore refusing to budge can not work out for you. It's just that Ace keeps coming out on top, except for this last time. And it's supposed to, I think, be that it was worth it because he saved Luffy's life. So maybe that's still I don't know. The message feels a little bit all over the place sometimes, but it's okay. So, this letter from Sabo is really sweet too. I liked the way that it's written. I hope this kid's okay. A part of me is almost could it be Marco? If Ace had found Sabo and was working with him, though, I feel like he'd have told Luffy about it. So, I don't know. I just keep feeling like this name is vaguely familiar. Anyway, the episode ends with that scene that we did see in the flashback already between Luffy and Ace, where Ace says, "Stop being an idiot. I'm never going to die." And the two of them making all of these plans together. And that is where it wraps up. So, all right, guys, I'm going to have to wrap this. I appreciate you all so much listening. And I really hope you're enjoying all the coverage. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.